Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mildly Gothic. If you're new here, what I like to do is a variety of artsy things, and what I have today has actually been a trend online for a little while. Not trying to do this as part of the trend, but it actually just happened to make a lot of sense for what I wanted to do. And it's using gallery glass, and it's this really cool thing that basically lets you make stained glass looking images on a flat plane of glass without needing to actually do stained glass. So a little bit of background on, I guess, why. My family, my dad's side is Puerto Rican, and my grandmother is, her side of the family is from Yauco. And there's this beautiful symbol I'll put on screen somewhere, and I really wanted to make something to commemorate that. Unfortunately, she did pass away recently, and I just want something as kind of a little memorial piece for myself to remember her by. And I will say, hi family watching this video, specifically my dad and my uncle. I was going to make these as gifts. You may still get them by Christmas sometime, but no time soon. Unfortunately, this craft was very, very hard on my hands. I do have carpal tunnel, and certain crafts I just find much more difficult than others, and that's why it takes me extra time to do things sometimes. Especially if I don't want to hurt myself. And to ensure that I don't hurt myself, I cannot do this craft fast or frequently. So while it was super, super fun for me to do as an experiment, I definitely need to take a good break before I actually try it again. So I think the project was really cute. I think it ended up being very pretty. I'm looking forward to finding a place to hang it up. And that's what we're doing today. We're going to take this image that symbolizes Yauco, this seal of Yauco, and I'm gonna turn it into something I can hang in my window and have all the light shine through. So I don't really have too much else. This should be a very simple, very cute, quick project. So I wanted to try gallery glass for the first time, and here's my critique. If you also have hand issues, take your time. It's just like icing a cookie with royal icing, where there's the thick outside piping and then the inside flood. I'll explain that a little bit more in the video, but if you have carpal tunnel or arthritis, this is not the best craft I would recommend for you. However, you can probably get through it with some breaks. So I'll explain my breakdown of everything a little bit more, so let's get to the project. So what I've decided to use as the basis for these projects are these 6x6 frames. Now there is one caveat. These frames are not real glass. They are plexiglass. However, looking up, it did say that this should work on plexiglass. I just don't know if the finish is any different. So what I'm gonna do once I figure out how to get this stupid protective film off of it, because I would have to get that off if I was using this as a general frame anyways. You'll see it's nice and shiny. So what I'm gonna do is I do still have to draw out, I have to outline this, and I'm going to draw my design out on a piece of paper so I can place it underneath and use it as a template. But I just wanted to show off, these come in these frames, and while I won't be using the back part of this frame because I do want the light to shine through, I may try to come up with a way to actually seal them in this frame because I think that would be a nice little border. To be determined, and if actually I did that, I could take advantage and paint the yellow outline on this frame and actually save myself some space in the square. So that's something to think about. I haven't gotten to that point yet. But first things first, I'm going to go draw out my design on my template and go from there. So I traced out my design on a piece of paper that is the same dimensions of my square. I didn't cut out the square so that I could actually tape the plexiglass to it, so that way it would stay in place. And I did have to draw a faint border inside the edge of the square because it does sit inside the frame. There's a little bit of a lip, so I didn't want to lose any of the design to that lip. Something to note when designing something like this for gallery glass, I tried to keep it in mind because I had this thought, but I didn't do the best job. It spreads. It's a much thicker leading for the lines than a thin pencil or pen line. So just be aware of spacing and size when you do your designs. I think everything ended up working out okay for this, but as you'll see, the leading is pretty thick, and so it did spread a good bit. This actually surprised me with how hard it was. The leading was really, really thick, and it is important to note this is not just black gallery glass, this is liquid leading. The bottle does specify that it is a different substance, and you can tell it is very, very thick. If you've ever iced with royal icing and done the outline, this is probably even thicker than what you would typically use for the border of those cookies, and it's coming through a very thin nozzle, so getting consistent pressure, at least for me, was very hard having carpal tunnel. I did kind of have to keep turning it or trying to take some breaks because I went at this pretty much all in one go, and I will say that was not a good idea. I was basically unable to do most anything else that involved intensive hand requirements for the rest of the day because this was just such a rough process. I think the outcome was super, super cute, but it is very important to maintain consistent pressure, otherwise the leading is uneven in spots. So I would say prioritize being slow and consistent over rushing to get it done. The outcome is just going to be that much better. I did even resort to using both hands sometimes just because it was simply easier to control the bottle. When it came to doing the vertical and horizontal thick lines down the center, I did those nice and slow and squeezed the bottle even more so I could do that full thick line in one pass because I thought that was going to get me the cleanest and best result overall. As much as it was a struggle, letting the entire thing only took me about 20 minutes start to finish. So even though I struggled with it, it was a relatively quick process, but as you can see, there's definitely some hiccups and it probably could have used a finer touch. So I'll be sure to do it in sections and take my time in the future to make sure that everything is as clean and not wobbly as possible. So I let my leading sit overnight to dry. It does need to be dry before moving on to the next step. And then we're on to the colors. So this is so much thinner and absolutely the easiest part of the gallery glass process, just filling it in with all of the colors. This part was really fun. However, I will say there's some technique to how you apply this as well. When you press into the bottles, obviously you're squeezing out the glass mixture. Be careful and ensure you pull the tip away before letting go of your squeeze, otherwise you're going to introduce a small air pocket at the top of the nozzle, so when you go to press again to disperse more of the substance, it's gonna spit and kind of spurt some out on your piece, and you may end up with color where you don't want it. You can introduce air bubbles, so I'd recommend going nice and slow. If possible, also maintaining contact with the glass, with the tip of the bottle, I think will also help reduce air bubbles because you're going to ensure you get a nice consistent flow on the surface and you're not accidentally trapping any air underneath. I did have some air bubbles and I was able to sort of fix some of them, but others I wasn't, and I do think they're noticeable in the final product. I don't think they're that noticeable, but they are there and I notice, therefore I'm saying that they're noticeable. The nice part about this is you can basically color it all in one go as long as you're smart and don't stick your hand in the glass. I'm not speaking from experience or anything. You do have to be very careful to make sure you don't accidentally set your hand down on it, just like any kind of painting. I went one color at a time because it was kind of like a fun little color by numbers. So I went through each motif because I figured if I did one color at a time, each motif at a time, I would get maybe better as I went through and get them all done. Originally, when I was planning to do multiple, I was going to basically do this like an assembly line process, but again, I decided to give my hands a break from the liquid leading. Now, you'll notice I'm not too careful about going up on the liquid leading. You know, it's not just staying within the center. Sometimes it kind of rises up against that border. Well, that's for two reasons. One, it will dry down a little bit. And then two, I was initially planning to use the reverse side as the front because that would be cleaner. It would have like all of the nice lines. You'll see towards the end, I end up deciding to use the textured side as the front because I think it gives it a little bit more character. But overall, it didn't really matter too much. There's only one spot you'll end up seeing at the end. But this was basically just a big fun color by numbers. I believe all of the coloring only took me about 20 minutes as well. So if you count the time it took to do the leading and the coloring, excluding all of the dry time, this craft technically took me under an hour, which is kind of crazy. and kind of proves why it's so popular. I do think it would be really hard to do large sections of it like I've seen some other creators do online, but I think with time and patience it would definitely be possible. So if you're looking to do something stained glass related or inspired and have a small portion you want to do it on, I think this would be great. I will say for some reason I thought this white would dry clear and it didn't. I don't know if that's a plexiglass thing versus a real glass thing, or if there's an actual white one that does dry clear. Regardless, I think it worked just fine. You still get plenty of light through it. It's just a little bit more opaque, which is not a problem in my book. It still looks fantastic. So yeah, once the flood was done, it didn't really spread much, so it actually maintained that really nice border all the way around the edge that you see, and I let it dry for about 24 hours before touching or messing with it. I'm not entirely sure why I waited until after I was done with the coloring before I removed it from the paper, but for some reason I did. But honestly, it was a really fun reveal to see how translucent or opaque the flood was. There were a few small areas I needed to touch up, so I went ahead and did those. And honestly, then it was on to the frame. So I started by drawing lines to dictate where I wanted all the squares to go on the frames. The only thing I needed for the pattern was I needed all of the corners to end with black. And luckily, using the width of the frame itself as my initial measurement, that ended up being perfect for the width of each box all the way along the way. I realized very quickly that I needed to base out all of my squares in white, otherwise the yellow was just not going to show up at all. So I went all the way around and painted it with, I think, 2 coats of white before I did any yellow. So after I was done with the white, I decided to do the yellow. Had to make sure the white was completely dry, so I walked away for many hours in between these steps, and I went over with yellow. The yellow ended up also requiring 2 coats because it was super pale. I mean, it is yellow, so it was showing through. Anywhere the white was thin, you could see it through the yellow as well. Once I went all the way around with the yellow twice, I decided to add 2 more layers of paint on top of that, and that's because I decided that the yellow that I was using was a little bit too aggressive for the color of the stained glass that I have, because the gallery glass is a pretty bright yellow, but against the yellow in the frame, it was like too garish. It was so bright, it was just not right. So I decided to lean into the little bit classier side. What goes better with black than gold? So I decided to do a thin layer of gold paint on top of all of the yellow, and I did end up doubling that. I think it just brought a lot more cohesion, class, elegance. I don't know, pick a nice adjective of your choice. I think it was a really good decision. I do think it also was nice to have the yellow underneath because it gave the gold a little bit of a brighter undertone than if I had just done the gold on top of the black. So I still think the yellow was a good decision. I just maybe didn't need 2 coats of it as well. It was only after all of the stripes were painted that I realized I probably should have painted the back first. So no problem, I did it after all of the stripes were painted. I just went through with my black paint, and I only did 1 coat. I wasn't really trying to make this a saturated black and have it match the front of the frame. I just needed it to not be bare exposed wood. So just did a coat all the way around, trying to keep my edges nice and clean as possible, wiping off the paint immediately so that I didn't end up with any black down the side or in the front. And it was actually easier than I thought it was going to be, and I think it absolutely just brought the whole thing together. So I'm at a point where I'm almost done. Somehow this cracked, and I literally don't know when that happened, which is a little unfortunate. But the next step is figuring out how to hang this up. And so what I've got are these screw eyes. I am going to first attempt to screw them in by hand, and if that does not work, I am going to drill a very small hole and then screw them in that way. What I'm then going to do when I put the screw eyes in is attach a chain over the top, and then I'm going to be able to hang it. The way that I'm going to secure this, my plan is to literally just glue this in, because this is the glass part of the frame, so it doesn't fit in, you know, the notch to stay. It just sits in the front. And so I did paint the back so it looks nice and somewhat more finished if you happen to view it from the other side, but I'm just gonna glue this in place. And I do intend to use this side as the side that's up. I thought I was going to use the other side, but I actually kind of really like the texture this gives, even though, you know, there's a little mistake in flooding. Overall, I think this side looks much prettier and kind of accomplishes more of that stained glass feel. So I'm going to attempt to screw these in, I guess. Don't ask me why I thought I was going to be able to screw it in with my hands. I'm not sure. But I aimed for the center of the black squares on the corners and ended up poking through kind of the outside with the screw eye just so I had a small dot, and did move to the drill. I was using a 1/16 drill bit, super small, smaller than the threads because I do still need the threads to actually catch in the wood and have some strength on them. So I just drilled both of those holes, had to test it a few times to make sure it actually drilled down far enough. And once I did, I screwed the screw eyes in, trying to stay as vertically straight as possible. And when it reached the end of the threads, I used some pliers to help me get it in as close to the wood as possible. I didn't want them sticking up too high. I wanted them to be nice and, level with the top. Next came attaching the chain for the end. So unfortunately, the only chain I have is silver. And I actually think it doesn't look too bad in the final product. I was pleasantly surprised. But I used some larger jump rings to attach the chain onto the screw eyes and measured out an approximate length of chain so that it would have a nice hang on a window, and attach those using jewelry pliers. So I used Gorilla Glue as my glue for this project. My super glue is dried up and gone, and hot glue was going to be too big and clunky, so Gorilla Glue it was. That's entirely how it came down to this glue choice. Also, Gorilla Glue is some of the best at gluing anything to anything, so with just a little bit of pressure on top and walk away for like 24 hours, it is not going anywhere. So here's the outcome of this project. This is nice and secure. I did put some, things on the back of it to help press it into place while it was drying to make sure that those were really bonded. And if I wanted to be even more secure, I could go and pipe a whole nother line of glue around the outside edges. I think I'm only going to do that if this proves to be not enough. So, and I have a light kind of set up here so I can, you can see a little bit of what it looks like with the light coming through. I don't know how much it's showing, it just looks like overexposed. That's fine. But honestly, this thing looks so cute hanging up in the window. I've got some pictures. I'm sure that's what I used for the thumbnail. But all in all, I have this beautiful little window hanging to let all the sunshine through. So maybe I'll get to the point of making gifts for family. I hope so, because I think this is a really sweet thing to have. And I hope you enjoyed the process just as much as I did making it. You can see there's a bunch of the little air bubbles I was talking about. They're kind of all over the place. There's one I tried to fix. So definitely not the cleanest, and obviously the first cut would never really be the gift anyways, because it's essentially the test and dry run. But this is the project. I think it's really cute, and I'm looking forward to finding it a permanent home in one of my windows. So thank you so much for joining me on this project. And I hope you've learned something about how to do gallery glass, especially if you have carpal tunnel or other hand issues. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.